Hi, this is Werewolf Will. This is part 5 of me captured by the army. So, in the other videos you've heard me actually be captured when I make a mess. I have been interviewed basically by the army after the capture. They knew what they were doing, and now I am officially working for the army because they seem to think that having a werewolf in the army would be a useful thing. It's been a lot of ego swallowing for me, but if you could go back and listen to the other 4 videos, this will make a lot more sense. Now I kind of agreed to go and do a training for being in the British Army, so I've agreed to go and do the SAS, whatever it is, and anyway, I'll talk through it in a minute, but yeah, I'm now going to basic training, but it's quite a funny story. It took a lot longer learning the stuff that the intelligence corps needed me to know than anything else. That was the tough stuff. The standard they required was crazy. I don't think they were used to teaching someone with such a high IQ as myself, because they made it so difficult to understand that it must have been really simple, to be honest. They kept telling me that it was, my fault and that it was a lack of understanding, but obviously can't be that. Basic training was a lot of fucking fun, really. I was brought into the camp in Pierbright in the back of a big black van on a sunny Sunday afternoon under the eyes of the whole camp. This in no way making it evident to everyone else that I was something very different than the average 17-year-old that, were on the course. What were they thinking? Me, a psychotic werewolf, mixing with young, egotistical cadets? It was a silly thing to do. Just a plain and simple, stupid action. They gave me my own place to stay, separate from the rest of my unit who were training. Those poor bastards had to share a bunk and do all the things like they do on telly with toothbrushes and, cleaning toilets and stuff. I was already going to be, excuse me, I've just eaten, an outsider, and this special treatment would only make me even less likeable to the other recruits. I think the powers that be wanted the guys in the unit to hate me from the start, which they did, which was fun. I was placed in training with the intelligence corps guys as they started their 14 weeks of basics. I was being sarcastic saying that it was fun, really. It was a bit crap. My initial week, called attestation, was an introduction to the discipline to which they expected me to bow. I was expected to be told what to do. You probably already realise that was something that did not sit well with me in a way I look at life. As a child, I was diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder. I don't think I had an issue, I just did not recognise any authority to defy. In the first hour of training, we had our introduction to our Lord and Master. He was Sergeant Major O'Toole, and oh, what a tool he was. He had been told that I was a special recruit that needed to be watched and helped out through the process. This did not go down well with him, as he took offence at me getting such special treatment. Anyway, long and the short of the story is that he was a little nasty towards me, he was a little shouty, and then suddenly he was a little bit dead. He was giving me a bollocking for something in front of the rest of the squad for some forgotten reason. I think I'd told him very respectfully to go fuck off at some point. I did really well and just stood there while he shouted about an inch away from my face at considerable volume. I could not even make out what he was saying. All I could do was smell his breath and get the odd splash of saliva on my skin from his extreme verbalisation. I could actually see into the back of his mouth and watch the uvula there shake as he screamed. It was all, very not nice. As he yelled and bawled, I tried to deal with it. Honestly, I really did. I tried to clear Fenrir from my mind, who was going mental in my head. He was expressing his fury at the way the two of us were being treated. I'd made a deal with the government that I would not hurt anyone on purpose during training. I mean, accidents could happen, but I'd promised I would allow myself to be treated like the other plebs under their command. The treatment here, though, was going to lead to an accident of some sort. This was insufferable, and he went on and on and on and on, and then oops, he was dead. As he continued to yell, I started to get a little restless. My posit, was sat behind him looking at me as the soldier man, with his skin like spam, continued berating me. I was doing okay. I was holding back from the want to kill this little man. I'd done very well letting him do this shit. Then the posit let go of an overemphasised and overdramatic yawn. If you don't know what a posit is, it's my werewolf soul, the werewolf part of me. He's out of my body. He's in the form of a giant invisible wolf. I can see him and I can communicate with him telepathically, and when we become the werewolf, we become one. But he has a really good sense of humour. So he did this overemphasised and overdramatic yawn, and I just couldn't help it. My response to this was to let out a little laugh, which silenced the yelling man. You could actually see him knocked off his game by the unforeseen circumstance. Something like that may never have happened before. He had no way of coping with this. He went into a bodily vibrating silence. After a moment of thinking about his response, the little man in khaki went batshit crazy. He started literally levitating on the spot. The blood vessels on his buzz-cut skull stood out like horse-pipes. Sweat beaded, then ran together on his tiny forehead. I felt as though I was in a spittle storm. His bodily fluids were flying into my face, eyes, and sometimes my mouth. I had really tried not to do anything awful as a response. I gently reached out, gently grabbing his neck, and drew him towards me, gently by the throat, and started to squeeze as I gently lifted him into the air, gently. I was particularly gentle, as you may have noticed. He slowly went quieter and quieter, grabbing with futility at the hand that was holding his throat, and he started struggling. I slowly brought his face closer to mine, and I looked deep into those little piggy eyes as he realised he had fucked up. It was bliss. His voice had faded to gurgles, and finally he slowly stopped wiggling his body and gave up. His head turned purple, and he was dangling from my hand by the neck. I put my spare cupped hand to my ear and spoke to him. "Sorry, what were you saying, O'Toole? I can't hear you anymore. What were you saying?" The rest of the squad that was stood there were just stunned and immobile, apart from a little uncomfortable shuffle of feet. I continued to crush the tool's throat in front of them. The poor young guys had no idea what to do. I don't know if they thought this might have been part of the training, but eventually I dropped the body on the floor, giving him a quick poke with my foot to see if there was still any life in him. "Oh shit," I said. "He's dead." I then looked around at the rest of the squad. I could see the horror and the confusion in their faces at what had just happened. I felt a little embarrassed, to be honest, and just shrugged my shoulders and looked at the floor. After a long silence, I felt a little more confident. I looked to my brothers in arms and smiled at them, and any eyes I met, but none of them could hold my eye contact, even though they were all potential killers, all with the potential to be killed, actually. I smiled and looked at them and tried to be sort of banter-filled and stuff. "The little fucker's not shouting anymore, is he?" I asked them, raising my hands. I genuinely thought this would lighten the moment. It didn't. I poked the cooling body with my toe again and tried to take it further. "What were you saying, Sarge? What were you saying?" I asked, cupping my ear and bending towards the body, emphasising that I was listening for a reply. No one else found it amusing, so I stopped trying to make them laugh. After a few moments of staring at the cooling corpse, I spat on him and walked back to my room. I was a little nervous about, but very excited to see how they were going to handle this turn of events. As you can kind of imagine, the army did not really enjoy my reaction to the O'Toole, especially the killing him bit. But they managed to write it off as an accident during training, and his widow and children got a substantial package from the government, I believe. To be honest, I was sure that he would not be missed by most. He was a grade A dick. I never saw the other recruits again, although strangely a week later they mentioned a trainee squad of soldiers on the BBC News had been killed in an awful helicopter crash out of that exact base camp. I always wondered if that was them. Not that I cared particularly about the soldiers themselves, but if they'd killed them to cover me, then that meant I was super important, and I really liked that idea. I did basic training on my own. The powers that be thought that would be best, and the raw recruits were probably better off without me, to be honest. They were right. I was treated with a new level of respect and followed the orders that I was given. No one shouted at me or tried to belittle me, so it all went very well. I did my basic training and left the little base just as a rumour. Now I moved on to the Special Forces training that I had so wanted to attempt. I would have to complete the 6-month course that would allow me to be part of not the SES, but the SRR, Special Reconnaissance Regiment, that are linked to the SES. I'd read about the selection as a kid. It had intrigued me that it was the ultimate test for only the strongest people to undertake. This was the craziest physical and mental test that any human could take to see if they were tough enough to be the best. I did not have any of the prerequisites for the course, but my handlers didn't seem to mind, to be honest. The trip to Wales consisted of me in the back of another minibus. I always was in the back of a minibus or a van for these journeys, separated from the normal human beings. I don't know if it was for their safety or if it was to build the idea that I was something different. Again, we were doing hundreds of boring miles on the motorway. The two soldiers with me were quite entertaining as I listened to them boast about their late-night conquests and the operations that they'd been on, and other crap of which other men's banter consists of. The van itself took on the smell of like a close-quartered men room everywhere, with a mixture of body odour and farts. Luckily, I had my music to soothe my mind and my posit for company, so I never felt lonely or bored. It was always great sitting and talking to the posit. We discussed how we would kill and escape from these guys, and what particular modes of torture we would undertake with them. Always a fun discussion, and there were so many various things we could do, it never got dull. The drivers were supposed to take it in turns to drive and rest, but they just chatted constantly and stayed awake on caffeinated energy drinks and cigarettes. The smoking had been our only bone of contention on the journey, but they soon stopped smoking in the van when I told them that I had no compunction in killing one of them to show the other that I meant it. I don't know who had given them their briefing, but they complied immediately and were silent for some good time after. I sensed the anxiety and the fear pheromones ooze off both of them. They'd obviously been told I was not to be taken lightly. We travelled up the M4 and crossed the Severn Bridge and made our way to a little base in Senny Bridge, which would be my home for the next few weeks of training. The training was actually quite a nice experience for me. I loved to be in the mountains, and the Brecons were pretty bleak but with enjoyable views. Wales is the greenest place I've ever been. It is green with green and then another green in between those greens. There are very few trees, and unsurprisingly for Wales, very few sheep, so I have no idea what the locals did at night in the Brecons. Their sisters, apparently. We arrived at the little base, and I, as usual, was late to arrive and came under the need to know banner. I think that the other recruits had been pre-warned about me to some degree, so wanted very little to do with me. Looking back on it, I think they may have thought that I was part of the selection process somehow. I often caught them looking in my direction, but contact was rare and only for moments. I ate by myself on a separate table from the rest of the guys. They all seemed happy for this to be the case, and it felt right to me too. Posit and I would love sitting and creating an uncomfy atmosphere that ruined their simple meal times. I would always arrive a little late to a room full of laughing and bantering men that would stop immediately on my arrival. I would always be polite and greet everyone. Proper psychos never show any anger or hurt. Laughter and smiles hide our true intentions. We just save up the malice to take it out on others a little later, if we can be bothered. I was disappointed, to be honest. These were supposed to be the ultimate men and the superior warriors of the world. They weren't that at all. They were just hill runners who could sit still in cold for a few days and fire guns. They were really disappointing. I was without doubt the most superior being there. Even just in my human form, I was ultimately the best. The food was, adequate, and contained lots of calories and unspecified meat pie and gravy and peas and chips, followed by some pudding and tinned custard. I missed raw flesh, but I'd made promises on that front. The meals were as if back at school, but I knew that the food would be a test as well as everything else here, so I ate heartily, having my usual 5 or 6 servings. I needed the significant calorie loading of plenty of food. I was a werewolf, so was a metabolic burning marvel. I could sense that those around me were all tough men, very tough men, and there was a mixture of fear and confidence in the room about what was going to take place over the next few days. The first month was really about walking and navigating in the mountains. We would slowly be pushed into becoming physical specimens through daily training that was always close to pushing the normals to exhaustion. A lot of them were struggling with the physical nature of what they were undertaking. I think that my lack of stress and my actual enjoyment of the process was annoying them somewhat. None of them could keep the pace, and they realised early on at the set of hill walks that I was not a usual candidate. Even compared to these supermen, I was something different. On the initial walk, some of the guys had already decided they would try and compare dick size. The sensible guys in the group kept a simple pace that they knew would maintain for hours. The dick swingers pushed to the front and tried to make it some sort of race. The actual PTs who were leading the party warned them against this, but went with them, knowing that the recruits would regret their decision. I suppose you pathetic beings have to try to promote your self-esteem somehow. The day was savage, the rain horizontal, but the weather kit that here was of much better quality than that of the basic grunts, and it kept us much drier and warmer for a lot longer than you would expect. I could feel the others suffer as the temperatures decreased and the cold water finally drove its way through their clothes to their skin. They were miserable, but managing to carry on against the odds as the initial cheery banter died away and the silence of the hard slog took over. I began to thrive in their weary breakdown. Their misery imbued me with the energy to push on. The day was grey, and the clouds screened the mountain tops from us. It was treacherous and slippy. The normal men, with their lack of my complete dexterity that the more superior of us have, would often fall and struggle like ickle baby deers on ice. It was not long into the trek that one man fell and turned an ankle, a prevalent injury in selection I was led to believe. I made a joke about the fact that we should, already get used to just leaving those who could no longer continue. Just kill them and move on or whatever. I laughed and added that if we ate him, it would help in the journey. I thought my joke was pretty funny, but no one else found it so. To mollify them, I picked up the invalid and laid him across my shoulders on top of my 80-plus pound pack. The rest of the group looked upon this action in disbelief, but none of them offered any other ways to solve the problem, so I carried him happily until we got to the point some 3 clicks out of our way, where we met a Land Rover that took him back to camp. These forced walks are not supposed to be a test of fitness. All these men were super fit. It was a mental test of how the strength of your mind could overcome your physical body. All you had to do to succeed was to keep going, keep throwing one foot in front of the other. This was no competition for these men, really. The last thing any of them needed right at this moment was someone to push the pace. For normal humans, it's all about if you can deal with the mental hardship of this situation. For me, it was just a little walk, to be honest. I knew that the pack that I wore was a few more pounds heavier than the other packs. They'd loaded it, but this was not a physical test for me. It was a slight mental test due to the monotony of the march and the terrain. The rain didn't bother me. The cold was not a worry to my body. If it had not been for the humour of the posit, I think I would have given up on the sheer boredom. He always brightened my life with his antics and jokes. At first, I just kept up with the front runners, then I started to push. Not too much, just hard enough that it would be a moderate increase in the pace. Just enough that they or anyone else would not notice me increasing the pressure. I knew that I was under scrutiny by the powers that be. I knew they were watching how I would interact with the other group members, to see if I would play well with others, to see if I would maybe feel some empathy for them. So I tried to do only small and annoying things so that it was hardly noticeable, just a note of cruelty. As I pushed, they initially tried to keep up, but eventually started to flag and fall. The group leader, the chief physical trainer, was maintaining time with me, although even he eventually slowed after all the others had dropped back. "Right, mate, you've done it. No more to prove," he gasped. "These humans are pretty damn pathetic," Will shared my posit. "They're not too super, these fucking super soldiers, are they?" Over the next few days and weeks, I broke all the records set by any man that had made the selection, and I kept myself to myself as few of the others dropped by the wayside. Eventually, this section of the famous selection was over with one last high walk, which of course, I ran because I'm a cock, and came in first, halving the record time posted by any other cunt. As it was the last night, I think a few of the less wise boys in the group decided they were going to give me a seeing to, as they say in Britain. a beating. They waited for me after I had showered, and 4 of them tried to bully me and then beat me down. I broke and smashed their pathetic human frames. I did not kill them, as I'd made the promise, but each of them would carry the scars and the memories of that night's stupidity. I did not even become wolfy. I just put each of the men down quickly and efficiently. I showed them no malice and did not linger to torture them physically, mentally, or emotionally. I just broke them and walked away. Again, I think it had been a test from the bosses in order to see if I would revert to type. I think I passed that test. The next part of the selection process was in the jungle. I have no idea where we were, but the guys that were with me now gave me a wide berth and a lot of respect and communicated with me when they needed to. In the jungle we learnt the SF tactics, special forces things, the weapon drills and the standard operating procedures. I realised I was being constantly assessed, and that assessment was showing that I was a loner and the me in team. I really enjoyed the jungle time, to be honest. It was a beautiful place where I could hunt after dark in my wolf form. In doing this, I was learning my own system of tactics for my other forms in this environment. I could also supplement my diet by flesh. I could consume the wildlife, and I got to have some amazing hunts for some strange creatures. At the end of this period, I was the only one amongst the remaining group who had not lost significant body weight or had contracted some tropical disease or infection. I did not even shit the worms that the rest of them had in their bellies. After that, there were a few months of employment training in specific areas in which I was going to work. Surveillance and reconnaissance, counter-terrorism, survival in hostile situations, signals and stuff. The only bit that actually tested me was the parachute training. I really did not enjoy throwing myself out of a perfectly good plane. Wolves were not meant to fly, and when communicating with the chief the night after that particular segment, I told him that it would never happen again. My posit really did not enjoy the free-falling experience, and he went mental. I also thought that I might be able to survive just simply jumping from a plane at height. However, I was unwilling to test that theory at this point or any time in the future. No parachuting for me was a rule. The last part of selection was my favourite. It was the survive, evade, resist and extract part of the process. We were dropped into the Brecon beacons with a minimal kit and told that some shit-hot professional soldiers were going to hunt us. As a result, I was dropped off, and at a safe distance I transformed. The hunters became hunted by the giant wolf I was, and by the end of the next couple of days, many of the professional soldiers regretted their confidence in that particular operational outcome. They did not capture me, and they did not evade me. In fact, several went missing themselves. It was 1-0 to Fen and myself by the end, and I walked back into the camp with a smile on my face, naked and proud of what I'd done. They had not taken me or found me. They would not have beaten a wolf in the mountains, not one 8 feet tall with the tactical mind of a vicious bastard. The last bit of the training was the resistance training. No, not weights. This was the test for our ability to resist interrogation. We'll not go into the details of what they tried to do. Mostly it was putting me in uncomfy positions and making me stand still with white noise and shouting. It was so funny as it had little effect on me. They even tried violence. I knelt with a bag on my head, my hands tied behind my lower back, and suddenly I was struck on the back of the skull with something heavy and solid. It knocked me forward onto my face, unseen by my attackers, my face kind of opened into an open smile. I then felt them start to kick me and beat me and shout and swear. They were deriving pleasure from the violence they could commit on me, and I also they were ridding themselves of all that pent-up frustration that I'd caused, that frustration that every man builds in their respective lives. As they kicked and punched my body and head, I allowed myself to fail and fall to the floor. I, for no reason, then, as I was lying there, just started laughing, and they started kicking harder for the next second too. Then I transformed. I became the werewolf me. The next 10 minutes were very sweet indeed. I did not put these 4 men through difficult postures. I tore them apart, and a few minutes later greeted the squad of armed men in human form with a bloody face and hands. I think I can resist interrogation, okay boys, I told them, as I introduced them to the parts of the 4 men that were spread around the room. I slept sound that night, and also untouched. No one had bothered me as I wandered through the camp to the showers. People had just disappeared and got out of the way nicely for me as I passed between the buildings. I smiled to myself and enjoyed my last night. Finally, I could reveal myself. So as I walked, I turned into my werewolf form, knowing that the eyes that saw me would never forget. Funnily enough, the next morning, my boss, the chief, was waiting outside my door. He'd been flown in by helicopter to remove me from the camp. As I came to the door, he smiled. "What, no breakfast?" I asked. He took off the peak, he pulled on the peak of his green camel cap and looked down. "No, well, not after last night's supper." "They had it coming, Chief," I replied. "No, they didn't. You're a bully," he replied, sighing and looking at the sky. "Only bullying the bullies, boss," I smiled. I did not get a passing out parade or a pretty certificate or anything. I got an uncomfortable helicopter ride out of there with a very grumpy chief accompanying me. Well, that was my training complete. I'll carry on with that story. I'm actually going to take you through some of the actual things that I did for the army. I hope you're enjoying it. This is the werewolf timing out, I suppose. If you would like to subscribe, that would be great for the algorithm. We don't monetize this. If you would like to go to the werewolf.host website, that would be good too. And if you've got any questions, just ask them. It'd be quite interesting. So thanks very much, and goodbye.